Hey everyone, welcome to the channel and I hope you're doing well. If you're new here, we talk about a variety of topics including crime, mystery, assassination and other things, so if you're interested, be sure to stick around. Anyway, let's get into today's case. Louis Guimond was a humble Frenchman who travelled to New France in the mid-17th century in the search of adventure and work. He ended up staying here, and despite having been blessed by a miracle during his life, he was soon captured by the Iroquois nation and would go on to face a terrible fate. This is his story. Louis Guimond was born in Toulouse-Perche in northern France in 1625. His father was François Guimond and his mother was Jeanne Delanoy. Not much is known about his early life, except that his father passed away when young Louis was just 1 year old. As a result, it's likely that his mother faced some difficulties providing for him, but other than that, we can assume he had a normal upbringing for someone from a humble background in rural France. Nearly 100 years before his birth, in 1534, Jacques Cartier set sail, hoping to discover a western passage to the wealthy markets of Asia. Instead, he arrived at the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the shores of the St. Lawrence River, which he named the Country of Canadas. Once he had mapped and described these lands, the French king instantly put as a priority the exploring, colonization and further mapping of this new land, and it wasn't long until an array of commercial entities were keen to begin exploration and exploit the resources of these lands. However, life in these remote places was very hard. Initially, fishing and trapping camps were established in the spring, and eventually a small civilian and military presence was established. Yet the weather was extremely cold, especially in the winter, and the lack of infrastructure didn't help either. Lots of hard work needed to be done, such as cutting down trees, as well as removing stumps and rocks so that the land could be cultivated. These rough conditions, as well as the nature of the work, led many people to starve or return to France. One issue with the new colony was the lack of women, and so to encourage more men to stay, develop and populate New France, the king sent les filles du roi, or the king's ladies, to these new lands. In time, the settlements established here would grow, and cash incentives such as parcels of land were even offered to bring people to the area. Over the years, immigration to New France became more and more attractive, and companies often offered to pay for travel expenses, including a return voyage should the men going decide to come back after their contract. In 1647, when Louis was 22 years old, he was offered a 6-year contract from Jean Jussereau, a supervisor of commerce in New France. Louis was young and a keen adventurer, ever curious to see what the new world was like. But Louis was not alone, for many residents of his village also saw this as an exciting prospect. The contract included shelter, food and promised adventure. The pay would be 40 livres per year, a pair of shoes, a thick wool suit, and a free passage back to France should anyone decide to come back at the end of their contract. The work entailed developing farmland on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River, near a village called Cap Saint-Ignace, north of Quebec City. Louis accepted and signed the contract, and would have said goodbye to his mother if she was still alive, and left home shortly after, and although he didn't know it at the time, he was to never return. It was now that Louis Guimond, along with fellow residents of his village, like Jean Malenfant, Julien Mercier, Pierre Lognon, and others started their journey westwards. Eventually, they arrived at the port of La Rochelle in western France, where 2 ships were waiting for them, the Saint-François Xavier and La Marguerite. Louis' ship La Marguerite set sail on the 6th of June 1647, and after 2 months at sea, he and his crew finally arrived in Quebec on Tuesday the 6th of August. Once in New France, near Cap Saint-Ignace, what exactly Louis did for work is not known, yet he most likely did all kinds of manual labour, but mainly clearing land for farming. But after a few years, this hard work would take a major toll on his body, and this detail would play a significant role in his story and the history of the town of Saint-Anne-du-Beaupré. On the 11th of February 1653, Louis married Jeanne Bitosset, a 17-year-old from Paris. Together they would go on to have 4 children, but their third child died soon after being born. Later that year, Louis and Jeanne rented a plot of frontage from a Mr. Grovel. This farmland, which needed to be developed, included a payment of 20 livres for each acre Louis cleared, as well as a barn with animals, and probably a cabin. In 1657, Louis and an associate named Jean Crevel were offered the opportunity to purchase 5 acres of land, including a lodging. Initially, Louis and his associate seemed enthusiastic about the purchase, but later Crevel fell into depression. As a result, he returned to France, and Louis became the sole owner of the land, furniture, and the house. In early 1658, 3 ships were arriving from France and were about 30 kilometers north of Quebec City, where the St. Lawrence River is still wide. Unfortunately, before they could make it ashore, a severe storm battered against their ships, and in the dark of the night, 2 ships were lost. Yet curiously, it seems that the ship that survived wasn't thanks to luck. Well, as the story goes, during the storm the sailors on board got down on their knees and prayed to Saint Anne, promising to build a chapel if they were saved. In the morning light, the sailors rejoiced, and as promised, built a chapel in a place called Petit Cap, now called Saint-Anne-du-Beaupré. Prior to 1658, the village didn't have a church, but Jesuits would often come and perform religious rites, which were needed regularly. On the 8th of March 1658, a man named Etienne Lessard generously donated a large piece of land to build the chapel on, and 5 days later, construction started, with the governor laying the first stone in a ceremony, attended by a few dignitaries. Louis had been living in Saint-Anne-du-Petit Cap since 1653, and he was in the village when the shipwreck incident occurred. Despite only being around 28 years of age, the 6 years of intense labour had taken a heavy toll on his body. He had severe back pain and had to use crutches to walk. Despite this, Louis still wanted to help to build the church, as he was a devout Catholic. Thus, he made himself useful during the construction of the chapel's foundations by carrying stone blocks, and as he handed the 3rd stone, his back was miraculously cured. This is the first official recognized miracle to have occurred on the site. Following Louis' miracle, one of the workers ran home to tell his hunchback wife of what had happened. She replied by saying, "I must go pray there." But as soon as she said those words, she was cured. This is the second officially recognized miracle from the chapel, and pilgrimages to the site have been organized as far back as 1661. Yet, despite having his ailments cured, a few years later Louis Guimond would be captured by the Iroquois nation, and after various weeks as their prisoner, he would face a tragic end. In the 17th century, the Beaver Wars, also known as the Iroquois Wars, were being fought intermittently throughout the St. Lawrence River Valley in Canada as the Iroquois sought to expand their territory and monopolize the fur trade with European markets. By the early 1640s, the Iroquois were attacking settlements in New France and raiding the colony's Algonquin allies throughout the St. Lawrence Valley. Animosity between the Mohawks, the Iroquois nation's strongest tribe, and the French continued in the years that followed, and occasional raids on French settlements terrified the inhabitants of New France. In one famous battle in May 1660, in Longsu, the French garrison commander Adam Dollard de Saumur led a battle with 17 pioneers, 40 Hurons, and 4 Algonquins from a small abandoned fort against hundreds of Iroquois. After a few days of the skirmish, the Iroquois hacked a breach through the fort's walls and started pouring in, while others climbed on top of the fort to attack. To delay the incoming Iroquois, Dollard ignited a keg of gunpowder, climbed up to the fort, and tried throwing it over the wall. But when the bomb left his hand, it struck the palisade and exploded within the fort, killing or wounding several of his men. After this, the Iroquois flooded in, and Dollard and the others were quickly overpowered and killed. About a year after the Battle of the Long Sault, in the relatively calm village of Saint-Anne-du-Petit-Cap, Louis and other local settlers would feel the wrath of the Iroquois nation when, on a typical Sunday morning in June, he was captured by the Mohawks, the most belligerent of the Iroquois nation. The Mohawks killed many villagers and brought some of them to their territory located beyond Lake Champlain in the Albany, New York region, which was a 15-day journey by canoe. Louis and 2 others were kept together as prisoners in a teepee and were tortured one after another. Eventually, the prisoners made an agreement that, while one was being tortured, the 2 others would pray to God for him, and the one being tortured would sing praises to Saint Anne, like the Ave Maris Stella. One of the captives, a 19-year-old named Francois Hertel, who either escaped or was released, wrote down what happened to Louis on a piece of birch bark. These events were then recorded by Father Jérôme Lallemand in letters sent to his mother and to Father Simon Lemoyne, which gives us proof of Louis' martyrdom in July 1661. It states, "He was struck with sticks and iron rods, but he kept praying to God, so much that the Iroquois were enraged to see him always move his lips to pray. They cut off all his upper and lower lips, and yet he did not stop praying, which upset the Iroquois so much that, while still alive, they tore his heart out of his chest and threw it to his face." Thus Louis died at around 36 years of age, and after he had been taken, his wife Jeanne held out hope that one day he would return to her, but as the days, weeks and months passed, she knew he wasn't coming back. Jeanne eventually remarried and would go on to have 2 sons with her new husband. She is believed to have passed away some years later in 1681 at the age of about 45. Today, Louis Guimond is an obscure figure to those outside of Canada, but his story is still full of hardships and is one worth remembering. A plaque from his birth village Trois-Rivières was dedicated to each of the adventurous men who left for the New World. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Louis Guimond. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of his life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next video. Thanks.